The conference hall in Brussels was tense even before Gavin Newsom took the stage. He was the darling of the American progressive left, charismatic, sharp-jawed, polished in a $5,000 suit. Cameras flashed as he approached the podium at the Global Policy Forum, his tone calm but assertive. Climate justice, he began, is not just about emissions, it's about guiding the world toward a shared, civilized future. One where innovation leads, not outdated tradition. The applause came mostly from European delegates. American media nodded with approval. But one man didn't clap. Sitting 5 rows back, arms folded, in a dark blue bubu stitched with gold, Ibrahim Traoré didn't blink. His gaze cut through Newsom like glass. He wasn't there to be impressed. Later, during the panel discussion, the moderator introduced Traoré without fanfare. No grand biography. No mention of the economic alliances he had forged across the Sahel. No recognition of how he'd kicked out foreign bases, reclaimed mining rights, or tripled literacy rates in 2 years. Just, President Ibrahim Traoré from Burkina Faso. The contrast couldn't be clearer. Newsom, all suits and slogans. Traoré, all silence and steel. And then it began. Newsom leaned in, tone oozing civility. Mr. Traoré, while we admire your country's independence, don't you think it's time to modernize? The world is moving forward. You risk being left behind if you stay stuck in the past. Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the moderator, his eyes were locked on Newsom. But before he could speak, Newsom pushed again, this time with a smile that barely concealed condescension. I mean, let's be honest. You're building policy around tradition. We're building it around data. A few journalists chuckled. Traoré still didn't move. Then he slowly rose. The room hushed. I'd rather be grounded in tradition than drowning in arrogance, he said flatly. Because your data doesn't free us. It measures how long we've been under your boot. Silence. Even Newsom blinked. Traoré's words didn't just echo, they detonated. The auditorium went from politely buzzing to breathless. Even the moderator, a veteran European diplomat, seemed caught between admiration and panic. Gavin Newsom forced a thin smile, the kind politicians wear when they've been struck but can't afford to bleed in public. He cleared his throat. I think we can agree passion plays a role in leadership, Mr. Traoré, but let's also be realistic. Africa cannot afford to isolate itself from the systems that drive progress, finance, technology, global standards. Civilization, after all, doesn't build itself. Traoré didn't sit. He stepped forward. Just one step. It was enough. You mistake dependence for progress, he said, voice low but resonant. And you mistake your system for the center of the world. The room was no longer a debate floor. It was a courtroom, and Newsom, without realizing it, was the one on trial. Traoré's gaze swept the panel. Let me ask, when your companies extract our cobalt, do you call that partnership? When your consultants rewrite our budgets, is that progress? When you build schools with one hand and sell weapons with the other, do you call that civilization? Gasps. A few phones came up. Live streams quietly resumed. Newsom shifted in his seat. His charisma flickered. That's an unfair generalization, he said. We invest in Africa. We share technology. Traoré cut him off. You export control, he said simply. And you sell it wrapped in words like development and equity. But your version of the future has always depended on us staying in the past. This time, the applause came from the back, where a few African and South American delegates sat. Then it grew. Even a few Americans didn't stop it. Newsom's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to losing a room. Newsom leaned forward now, not to bridge a gap, but to assert control. Mr. Traoré, he said sharply, we are not enemies. But we can't let emotion replace facts. The international community has standards. We need responsible governance, transparency, alignment. If you resist that, if you continue to reject Western cooperation, you risk isolating your people. Traoré let the words hang. Then, with calm that almost unnerved the room more than anger would have, he asked, isolation from what? Newsom blinked. From opportunity. A pause. Traoré's voice was quieter now, but sharper. Opportunity for who? Newsom opened his mouth, but Traoré kept going. I've seen what you call opportunity, he said. It comes with binders, contracts, and non-disclosure clauses. It comes with advisors who answer only to Washington. It comes with spreadsheets that value our forests as carbon offsets, while ignoring the people who live in them. The room stirred. Delegates leaned in. Traoré stepped to the center of the stage, uninvited. The moderator tried to speak, but fell silent under the weight of the moment. I'm not here to ask your permission, Traoré said. Burkina Faso does not need charity with strings. We need respect. And if that offends your version of civilization, maybe your version needs revision. Newsom stood too, now face to face with him. You talk about respect. But what about order? Stability? You want to tear the system down, but then what? Traoré didn't blink. No. I want to build a new one, with hands that haven't been bloodied by theft. Silence again. The moderator finally spoke, voice thin, gentlemen, let's. But the moment had already outgrown him. The cameras were rolling. Hashtags were forming. And the world, for a rare second, wasn't looking toward Washington or Brussels, but toward Ouagadougou. The clip of Traoré saying, with hands that haven't been bloodied by theft, hit social media before the panel even ended. Within an hour, it had racked up over 2 million views. On American networks, pundits scrambled to interpret the exchange. CNN called it an uncomfortable but necessary confrontation. Fox News labeled Traoré a radical voice echoing anti-Western sentiment. MSNBC dubbed it the moment the Global South finally spoke up. Backstage, Gavin Newsom was seething, but composed. His press advisor whispered, "We can spin this. Say it was about balance. Say it was an invitation to collaborate." Newsom shook his head. He didn't debate me. He embarrassed me. Meanwhile, Traoré wasn't in the green room. He was in a hallway, sitting on a bench, answering a video call from his cabinet back in Ouagadougou. "They're rattled," one minister said with a smile. "Twitter's exploding. Even the diaspora in Paris is celebrating." But Traoré didn't smile. He leaned forward, voice even. "This isn't about a viral moment. It's about momentum. They still control the banks, the oil routes, the stories. One line won't change that." Back inside the venue, a young European journalist chased him down. "President Traoré, a quick word, why did you speak so bluntly to Governor Newsom?" Traoré looked her in the eye. "Because diplomacy has too often been a euphemism for silence. I don't represent a lobby. I represent people who don't get invited into these rooms." The journalist hesitated. "So, do you want to replace the West?" Traoré's answer came without pause, "No. I want to stop pretending it's the only way." That quote would be on the front page of Le Monde by morning. But Newsom wasn't done yet. Later that night, during a private donor dinner in Brussels, he stood before billionaires and diplomats and said, "The world is at a crossroads. And if we let chaos speak louder than structure, we'll all pay for it." It was subtle, polished, and aimed directly at one man. But Traoré had already moved on. He was boarding a plane, to Lagos. To meet with 3 other African leaders. And none of them were interested in seeking permission. The jet descended into Lagos under a grey Nigerian sky. Traoré stepped off the plane without ceremony, no red carpet, no motorcade. He preferred it that way. The real meetings were never about spectacle. In a quiet conference hall near Victoria Island, he was greeted by three men who needed no introduction: Bola Tinubu of Nigeria, William Ruto of Kenya, and Assimi Goïta of Mali. The room was secured. No press. No advisors. No translators. Just four leaders with a shared history, and a common storm on the horizon. Tinubu spoke first. The Americans are nervous. They're calling our finance ministries non-stop. What did you tell Newsom? Traoré sat calmly. That we're not here to decorate their systems anymore. Goïta chuckled. I like that. Ruto nodded. But now they'll come with the usual offers: more aid, more tech partnerships, more development plans with names longer than the projects themselves. Traoré leaned in. Let them come. But this time, we write the terms, or we walk. There was silence. Then Tinubu asked, are we ready to turn down the money? Traoré didn't flinch. They already took the gold. We're just asking what it's really worth. Back in Washington, a different kind of meeting was unfolding. Gavin Newsom sat with a small group of national security analysts. Satellite photos, intelligence briefings, and economic reports flashed on a screen. They're forming a bloc, said a CIA liaison. Unaligned, unpredictable, and with rising public support. Newsom shook his head. They're not unaligned. They're anti-alignment. Someone else chimed in, if they control energy, minerals, and public narrative, they don't need tanks. They'll rewrite legitimacy. And that's what worried him most. Traoré hadn't just challenged him on stage, he'd challenged the framework of how power operated. He hadn't asked for inclusion. He'd declared autonomy. By morning, Newsom's team had drafted a plan, a new Africa Partnership Charter, complete with billions in renewable energy funding, digital infrastructure, and soft influence initiatives. But Traoré saw it coming. And he wasn't going to Brussels again. This time, the conversation was happening elsewhere, louder, bolder, and without apology. In Lagos, the four leaders didn't toast champagne, they circled maps. Dotted across the table were red pins: lithium in Mali, bauxite in Guinea, oil in Nigeria, uranium in Niger. But there was something else now: green pins. Local refineries. Regional data centers. A transcontinental energy corridor in early construction. We don't just need to own resources, Traoré said, pointing to the map. We need to control the narrative around them. Ruto added, the West brands us unstable because that's cheaper than calling us independent. Tinubu leaned back. They've taught their people to pity us, then profit off that pity. And Goïta, more soldier than politician, tapped his finger against the table. Then let's make them fear our discipline instead. Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom was flying to Berlin. He was invited to speak at a global investment summit, ostensibly about green technology. But unofficially, everyone knew, this was damage control. The West needed a new story. As he stepped up to the podium, he opened with a quote from Roosevelt, pivoted into climate innovation, and then subtly shifted. We must not allow ideological division to undo the very systems that brought us global progress, he said. Isolation only benefits those who profit from chaos. Polite applause. But in Ouagadougou, they were watching. Traoré sat with his communications chief as Newsom spoke. He didn't react until the final line. The American governor had ended with a veiled warning: history will not remember the loudest, it will remember the builders. Traoré smiled, slightly. Then he stood, walked outside into the courtyard, and addressed his press corps without a podium. I don't need history to remember me, he said. I need my people to remember who they are. It was short. Powerful. It hit TikTok before midnight. Within hours, it was everywhere. And this time, Newsom wasn't the headline. Africa was. And it wasn't asking for permission. The next morning, Gavin Newsom sat in his hotel room overlooking Berlin's government quarter, scrolling through reaction clips from the African press. One quote played on loop. "I don't need history to remember me. I need my people to remember who they are." He paused the video, set the phone down, and stared blankly out the window. Traoré hadn't just undermined him. He had recentered the conversation, taken the spotlight off the West entirely. At a U.S. Embassy breakfast briefing, a diplomat asked, "What's the move, sir? Sanctions?" Newsom shook his head. "No. That would confirm everything he's saying. We can't attack a story where we're no longer the protagonist." Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré's team was already strategizing the next move. His foreign affairs advisor, Aminata Keita, entered the war room with a smirk. Germany just sent a soft proposal. Renewable energy infrastructure in exchange for rare earth access. Traoré didn't even look up. "It's a new label on the same old box." Keita added, "But the UN is listening now. Even South America's starting to echo your language." Traoré stood and walked over to the map again, his eyes focused not on Europe or Africa, but the lines between them. "The goal," he said, "is not to flip the hierarchy. It's to erase it." Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom boarded a plane back to the U.S., exhausted but burning with a new tactic. On the flight, he outlined a speech, this time not for foreign allies, but for Americans. He would pivot the narrative, paint Traoré as a populist demagogue, as someone exploiting grievances, not solving them. But even before he landed, Traoré had already anticipated it. He gave a press conference in Abuja, where he was greeted by thousands waving not Burkina Faso's flag, but handmade signs that read, "We are not your shadow. This is not rebellion. This is remembrance. And most notably, we are not anti-West. We are pro-dignity." That last quote would go viral in 11 languages. The West had words. But Traoré had a voice. And it was no longer speaking from the margins. In Washington, D.C., Newsom stood before a packed hall at Georgetown University. The audience was a mix of students, journalists, and foreign policy veterans. He looked sharp, rested, but inside, he was fraying. He opened with a warning: democracy is being challenged not just from within, but from abroad. By voices who reject global order, but offer no structure in its place. He never named Traoré. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. Meanwhile, Traoré was thousands of miles away, walking through a crowd of farmers in rural Senegal. No teleprompter. No stage. No suit. Just a rolled-up sleeve and a translator. One elder raised his hand. "Why are they afraid of you?" Traoré smiled. "Because I ask a question they've never wanted to answer: what if we don't need them?" The old man nodded. "Then they no longer own the future." That sentence would later become a mural in Nairobi. Across media, the split was growing. CNN aired back-to-back panels. One titled "The Rise of Charismatic Authoritarianism," showing clips of Traoré and Goïta. The next, "A New Voice for the Global South." Same footage. Opposite spin. Newsom's inner circle urged caution. "You're escalating," one advisor warned. "He's not attacking America, he's rejecting a structure. There's a difference." But Gavin was unmoved. "He's undermining faith in the system. That is an attack." Still, behind closed doors, even American business leaders were divided. At a private tech summit in San Francisco, CEOs debated whether to pull out of West African ventures, or double down before China did. One executive muttered, "I don't care who leads what, as long as the minerals ship on time." But another disagreed: "If we don't change our tone, will be remembered as the generation that lost Africa. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré wasn't watching speeches. He was with engineers, overseeing solar grid expansions. A journalist asked him if he'd seen Newsom's remarks. He paused, then said, "I don't need to hear his speech. I've already seen their silence." And with that, he walked into the construction zone, where power wasn't just debated. It was built. The sun beat down over the Sahel as Ibrahim Traoré stood beside a tall structure, a prototype of a locally manufactured wind turbine. Around him, young engineers and students took notes, snapped photos, and asked questions not from textbooks, but from lived experience. "This isn't aid," Traoré said, placing a hand on the turbine. "This is autonomy." Meanwhile, the American media machine shifted gears. Newsom, advised by both White House officials and legacy media consultants, launched a new framing: Africa deserves strong partners. It sounded inclusive, balanced, reasonable. But it reeked of marketing. On 60 Minutes, Gavin was interviewed. The journalist leaned in and asked, "Governor, is Traoré a threat?" Newsom didn't blink. "No. He's a man with passion. But passion without discipline is dangerous. We've seen that in history." The implication was clear. But so was the response. Within hours, Traoré posted a video from a school in northern Burkina Faso. Children were reciting mathematics, under a solar roof funded by a regional cooperative, not the IMF. He spoke to the camera: "If passion is dangerous, then why does your fear sound so rehearsed?" That clip hit 1 million views in 18 hours. And the next day, it was projected onto the side of a building in Accra. The conversation had shifted again. This was no longer about global power politics. It was about generational legitimacy. Back in California, a student protest erupted at UC Berkeley. They held up signs with Traoré's words. One read, "We've memorized your structure. Now we're designing our own." Newsom watched from his office, his advisors circling, his donors calling. The tech sector was jittery. The diplomatic corps was uncertain. And yet, the governor remained composed. "He wants the world to think it's either him or us," he said. "But there's a middle path." "No," said his policy aide softly. "There was. We didn't take it." In West Africa, Traoré didn't gloat. He simply kept building: grids, schools, rail, narrative. Where others issued white papers, he planted roots. Because history isn't only written by the victors. Sometimes, it's reclaimed by the forgotten. Weeks later, the World Economic Forum opened in Geneva. The usual crowd arrived: prime ministers, billionaires, security analysts, and tech moguls in sharp suits. But this year, one name was whispered more than spoken: Ibrahim Traoré. He wasn't on the guest list. He didn't need to be. Instead, across Africa, in a dozen cities, young leaders hosted what they called the People's Forum. Live-streamed debates, engineering showcases, cultural panels, and trade signing ceremonies, all coordinated without a single Western consultant. In one clip from Dakar, a 22-year-old economics student addressed the crowd: "They called us underdeveloped. But now they're rushing to develop access to us." In Geneva, Gavin Newsom was scheduled for a headline panel: "Building Trust in an Unstable World." He walked on stage, adjusted his tie, and began. "There's a rising tide of distrust in the global order. Leaders like Traoré don't solve that problem. They exploit it." But just as he finished the sentence, audience phones buzzed. Live from Ouagadougou, Traoré had gone live. He stood in front of a newly opened trade school with students behind him, their uniforms plain but proud. "No one distrusts order," he said. "We distrust systems that label us threats for wanting to lead ourselves." His voice was calm, firm, without venom. Back in Geneva, Newsom paused, visibly annoyed. He tried to continue, but murmurs filled the hall. A moderator leaned in and whispered, "The feed has more viewers than this stage." And that was it. The final shift. Not with drama. Not with applause. But with attention. Power didn't leave the room. It simply moved somewhere else. Later that night, as Western pundits debated the Traoré problem, the man himself walked silently through a garden outside the capital. No camera. No fanfare. Just a man breathing the land he refused to sell. He turned to Keita, who followed a few steps behind. "They still think this is about me," he said. She nodded. "That's why you're winning." And in the distance, the wind turned the blades of the first rural-built turbine, unpolished, imperfect, and entirely theirs. In a world built on podiums and press releases, one man stood without a microphone, and still changed the conversation. Ibrahim Traoré didn't conquer with armies. He didn't beg at summits. He didn't ask for a seat at the table. He built his own. While leaders like Gavin Newsom tried to define the future from air-conditioned halls, Traoré planted his feet in the dust, beside the people who had always been forgotten, until now. He wasn't loud. He was undeniable. They tried to label him a rebel. A populist. A threat. But Traoré wasn't against the system. He was beyond it. And when they told him he didn't belong, he didn't argue. He led. Because real power doesn't scream. It builds. And somewhere between the silence of Geneva and the voices rising from Africa, the world finally heard something it hadn't in a long time. A future not inherited, but made.